good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from wherever you may be joining. Again, this is Chris Kammer. You might have met me before, either in person or virtually. I'm the chair of the Knowledge Committee for MESA, the Manufacturing Enterprise Solutions Association, and I'll be your moderator today. I want to start by saying that we at MESA understand the difficult situations everyone is facing at home and at work as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We'd like to publicly thank all of those in the healthcare, critical infrastructure, and life-sustaining industries for your strength and resilience and hard work. We couldn't get through this difficult time without you. So once again, thank you for your efforts, and to anyone else who has had to endure undue hardships during this time. So with that, let's get on to our MESA Roundtable discussion. As you all know, industries around the world are taking unprecedented measures to deal with the COVID-19 crisis, including changing work schedules, encouraging work from home, enforcing guidelines like social distancing when employees need to be in person, pivoting to new products and new product lines as manufacturers and producers, which is something that many companies have never had to do before. And they're doing this while managing huge changes in demand and supply in order to keep their businesses moving. We're going to ask our panelists some key questions about these efforts, and we encourage you to participate. So as we discuss this situation with our panelists, please feel free to type questions into the question answer box on your GoToMeeting control panel, and I'll do my best to bring up those questions as I see them and ask them of our panelists. So before we start with the dialogue, I'm going to provide some brief introductions of our panelists here. So I'll start with Jimmy Asher. Jimmy is the chairman of the board for MESA International. He's the chairman of the international board. He's also a senior manager at Deloitte Consulting. We also have Scott Doherty, senior vice president of international business development at Cormatec Incorporated. We have Uwe Kuipers, who is the MESA EMEA, or European, Middle East and Africa board chairman. He's also a senior business consultant for Rockwell Automation. We have Konrad Leiva, who is the director of ecosystem and workforce development at SESME, which is the U.S. Smart Manufacturing Institute. And we have Brad Rowan, the chair of the MESA Americas board. Lastly, we have Trevor White, who is the divisional information officer for Toyota. All of these folks are active members in MESA and also have their day jobs as well, and are working very hard to try to deal with these issues in their own companies and also helping others at MESA to try to get through these issues as well. So welcome, panelists. Thank you. So with that, I'll jump into some of the questions that I've got already set up for these panelists, but I definitely, again, want to encourage any of the attendees to go ahead and chime in with your own questions, and then we'll go from there and see if I can interject some of those as we move along here. So first, I'm going to start with you, Scott. What are we hearing at America's board level about how manufacturers are thinking about smart manufacturing, its relevance as a result of COVID-19, social distancing and plant environments, demand patterns, supply conditions, agility, etc.? This is a wide open question, but just want your thoughts about really what you see happening there.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and appreciate the introduction. I'll jump in a little bit about Cormatec. We make an emissions control catalyst that is used in the power industry, industrial, and engines for keeping air clean. So we're certainly an integral part of a supply chain to sort of the power industry, and what we're seeing is it certainly has this COVID-19 event has certainly allowed us to review and look at the strength of our supply chain systems, how we actually get our materials and products from our suppliers. We're a vendor to others, and so we're part of that supply chain. So I think that's probably one of the bigger things that we'll continue to evaluate, and are doing that on a daily basis as we take this day by day, working with our teams at the plants, working with our suppliers, and then working with our customers to keep a constant supply of materials and the changing needs. And we've relied on the systems we have in place, but also are continuing to document areas for improvement, I think, as we go through this quite unusual time.
Sure. Yeah. And you're definitely a key element of the supply chain, as you mentioned, for a lot of companies, because you provide, as you mentioned, products that help keep the air clean, which is a very important element. Jimmy, if you don't mind, I'd like you to kind of add on to what Scott brought up from the perspective of our international board. How are you seeing things around the world as it pertains to the topics that Scott brought up?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chris. So, first and foremost, people are trying to make sure that their employees are healthy and putting mitigation strategies in place for that. We saw factories in China start to put mitigations in place a couple of months ago, and shelter manufacturing. And then we obviously have seen that come over to the US. From the supply chain perspective, we've kind of seen that timing influence the ramp up both over into Asia and across Europe, and then over to the US. We see resurgence coming back as far as manufacturing gearing back up in Asia. So starting to move back from the longer lead items within inside of the supply chain.
Yeah, we are definitely more interconnected than ever before, than we've ever been before, in terms of world commerce. So it's very difficult for, I think, any company at this point to rely on resources that come from specifically from the US or from whatever country in which they operate. So how important do you see us being able to continue to work effectively with countries like China and other producers of goods and raw materials and intermediate products, Jimmy?
Very well, actually. So the manufacturing plants in China are starting to ramp back up and come back over. So it's really kind of shifting the supply from overseas back into the US. From the collaboration perspective, ways of working, video tools and teleconferences as we kind of share, and as you put it, the more internet connected world, not only from supply chain, but some of the interactivity tools that we're leveraging as well too.
Sure. Well, if I could turn it over to you, Brad, for your perspective as the chairman of the Americas board for MESA. Obviously, we talked about kind of the world effects here, but what are your thoughts in terms of American manufacturing and production companies, including those that you work with every day and also here at MESA? What are your thoughts in terms of how those companies are having to deal with concerns, again, like social distancing, changing supply and demand patterns, and how they need to remain agile in order to maintain their competitiveness?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for introducing that. A couple of things come to mind there when I look at it through the lens of the Americas board and what we're hearing from the industry. One of the things that we've been promoting for a long time is really getting people on board and engaged with smart manufacturing to drive value, to help them open up some of the possibilities of technologies around the cloud, how we can get autonomous but connected ecosystems working together, and really support this remote working type of operation. Some of the underlying themes that Mesa has been proposing fits very well with some of the challenges that businesses have now, as social distancing and keeping people as physically separated as possible from each other come into effect. Anecdotally, I saw a political cartoon this morning, which I think was quite funny. It was a consultant asking a group of people to fill in a questionnaire. And the first question is, who is the leader in your organization that's driving smart manufacturing 4.0? And the answers were A, CEO, B, CIO, C, CTO, D, COO, and E, which everybody filled in, was COVID-19. So there's a little truth in that joke, of course, but I think the reality is the COVID-19 and the impacts that it's forcing us to have in terms of how we work is really hitting home the point that we have technologies that are available to us that can help us work more efficiently if we are looking at it through the right incentives and the right lenses. So an upside to what's happening could be said that we are now looking at traditional ways of working and recognizing that those ways of working plus the infrastructures that we relied on are not necessarily sufficient. So some of the things that I've heard real brief here from the industry side in terms of impacts were immediate impacts is people had to leave the office place, but there wasn't enough virtual private network capacity in their businesses to have everybody work remotely. So immediately trapped, you can't communicate with each other. And a lot of people immediately were switching over to cloud-based technologies. So moving from an on-prem Skype to Microsoft Teams in the cloud with O365 type of technologies, which has shifted the way people are working. Mm-hmm. On an upside, I've heard people say that it's also brought people closer together because it's now becoming more personal interactions as people work together. Specifically from a plant side, a couple of things that jump out there is, echoing back to what Jimmy was saying in a broader context, is companies, manufacturers are really concerned with how to keep their employees safe, how to keep them healthy, and how we interact with our customers and suppliers who physically arrive at our plants, as well as, and we shouldn't forget that we have support organizations or service providers that need to come into plants to service equipment and service our automation. So there's a lot of challenges with how do we give people access to our plants who need to be at our plants in a remote social distancing way. So I'm hearing a lot of themes now around things like automatic check-in and loading and unloading of trucks. A lot of discussions around virtual reality to help operators. There might be one operator in a room and then remote control organizations that help us out. So I think a lot of the areas that we've been promoting here in Mesa and America using smart manufacturing technology is starting to come to people's minds as to why it's important and less about the FTE value added part of the equation.
Yeah. You brought up a couple of really interesting topics there, and one that I found particularly interesting was that you're hearing some people say as they do more remote work that it's actually become more personal, that the interactions have become more one-on-one, and as a result, you're getting more interactivity between individuals. That's a very interesting topic, actually. I'd like to explore that a little bit more with the rest of the team here. I'm sure that everybody that's on the panel and probably every listener as well is having to do some level of remote work. Is there anyone else on the panel that would like to jump in on that topic? I think maybe Conrad, if you don't mind, especially since you're focused on workforce development as one of the aspects of your efforts at SESME. Can you comment on that and your thoughts around the need to work remotely and how that can make things more or less personal?
Well, yeah, it's definitely a personal time for everybody to reevaluate where they're at, where they're going, and so the businesses reevaluate their plans, but each part of the workforce reevaluate their role in the organization, right? And part of what we're looking at as an institute is how to recover quickly from the impact of this pandemic, right? And workforce development and training we see as a big part of that. There was a a big gap in the skills, a big skills gap in manufacturing before this situation. And we feel that this could be a good time to make a dent in that gap by taking the slower time right now to reskill a lot of the workforce with higher skills in digital skills in automation and integration. And maybe when we start ramping up, we come back with ready to achieve the growth patterns we had before, or even accelerate them through higher productivity. Jimmy mentioned reshoring, and I think a lot of people are looking now to move facilities around the world to places that have been less impacted, or to rely less on one country versus another. And we want the United States to be one of the preferred locations. And to do that, we need to be competitive and increase productivity. So I agree with Brad that there's an importance of smart manufacturing and being part of making our industry more competitive and more attractive to that workforce.
Thanks, Conrad. That's good insight. You know, as you were talking, we had a question come in from the audience that I'm going to bring up, and then I'll expand upon as well in relation to something else that Brad brought up. So the question is, you know, looking into the future, not all the workers that are set aside, and I think we mean, you know, that are having to postpone their work or perhaps be furloughed or even laid off. Not all those workers will get back to work, or at least not back to their previous work position. What measures should be put in place for education, training, and preparing the new workforce for new ways of doing business? And again, I'll turn that to you, Conrad, and then I'll ask a follow-up question as it pertains to how augmented reality is helping us do that, and I'll turn that one to you, Uwe. So, Conrad, generally speaking, again, what measures do you think should be put in place for education, training, and preparing the new workforce that's going to emerge once this crisis goes away?
Well, I can tell you that the Manufacturing USA program, under which Sesame is one of the innovation institutes, is responding to this and funding actually projects to reskill that workforce, and they range from creating a network of education facilities and scaling up the education facilities we already were working on in academic centers, and how do we take that into a broader national footprint that includes matchmaking manufacturers that are ready to innovate with system integrators that might be low on work and need to reskill. So, you know, like train-the-trainer programs, so we can also escalate the access to these skills, and then you know, see how we can help fund apprenticeships, internships in manufacturing on these new skills that are needed to implement strategies like smart manufacturing. So there's a lot going on right now. It's not all out there. We're in the you know, trying to figure out how to get those funds out, which are the best projects that will have the most immediate impact. But there's definitely initiatives underway.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of it's going to come from, as you mentioned, government initiatives, but also universities and schools and technical institutes, but also within the companies that we deal with every day, within manufacturing and production companies. Technology is being used to help with that as well. And again, Uwe, if you don't mind, I'm going to call you to the table on this. Brad had mentioned the use of virtual reality, and I think augmented reality is an area, an extension of that, where you've done some pretty significant work. Can you talk to us a little bit, Uwe, about how augmented reality can help with education of the workforce, and particularly just-in-time education of the workforce?
Absolutely, yes. And thanks very much, Chris, for the question. No, I think augmented reality is really an enabler in nowadays, and we see that around in EMEA as well as around the globe more and more. What Conrad was mentioning, and Brad as well, from an education perspective, to really build a development plan for the people and interactively train them and educate them how to do activities can really help them in these difficult times to spend the time on that, as well as supporting people. So as you said, we have distance people, we have experts sitting now at home, and the people are sitting in the plant and need to get supported by these experts so they can call in, having the call capabilities and having the augmented realities to actually show them where the issues are, explaining that, highlighting this, and giving that one-to-one education on supporting the people by the experts directly. And that goes, for example, as well for the maintenance people, or for maintenance departments, quality departments. So all the people which are back-end office and sitting in the areas in their home right now, been utilizing the technology. We actually have a case right now where a company have started a project, and they were thinking, okay, how do we do even continuing with that project and utilizing the technology? So we use AR actually to do a functional requirement specification, building up specification, and walking through the plant with these people by using augmented reality and getting hints, and by that having a one-by-one discussion in a very fruitful way. And that can start already when another area I'm thinking about is when we talk about designing or developing something and sharing this information very quick, and then people can chat and talk and share by using augmented reality in its complete environment, so that you can exchange information by the experts and not being nearby in a separate room, but really keeping the safety distance really helps in this environment a lot. So using startups with different resources as well. So every time when you have specialists being sitting remote, AR is a great tool to capture that information, to transfer the knowledge, to educate people, to advise. But also there you see very quick as well, if connectivity of the plants have been done in the past, if the plants are really connected and therefore being able of overlaying real-time data into the AR so that people can understand and discuss in deep, fruitful ways what are the main issues. Another area what I see is that people now use the time more for analyzing their perspective and analyzing the data they have collected in the past, and by that working with the experts again to understand where potential benefits could lay when the manufacturing really starts up and kicks up again to optimize their processes.
Sure.
But a lot of companies now sees where they are missing the smart manufacturing right now and what needs to be done. So I would 100% agree with Brad, what he mentioned before, that the C-level might see now how important the smart manufacturing actually is.
Good. That's good to hear. You know, obviously this is a very dynamic environment, and in the spirit of that, I've just received word that one of our panelists, Trevor, is going to have to go do a very important internal call that came up at the last minute here in less than 5 minutes. So Trevor, if you don't mind, I'd like to put you on the spot, and we'll use that as an opportunity to reset the discussion a little bit. Hopefully you can spend a couple more minutes with us here, but can you tell us what's happening inside of your company, Toyota, obviously one of the largest automotive manufacturers in the world. Tell us a little bit about how Toyota is dealing with the crisis. We'll expand on it after you leave.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. It's definitely a very dynamic environment, and one, you know, I've been with the company now 22 years, and definitely in the top 3 of events that we've had to deal with within Toyota. You know, we've been shut down for the last couple of weeks in North America, and that's posed a significant amount of work for us on the IT side and the smart manufacturing side, as you can imagine. Some of the things that we've been working on are really focused around team member communication, and of course our supply chain and our enablement of members from work to work from home. So from the analytics and IoT side of things, we've created very quickly dashboards to visualize, analytic dashboards in Power BI to visualize kind of what the status of our team members are in our factories, and making sure that we understand their condition, thinking about their health and well-being first. So we've got a daily meeting with senior level executives to visualize what the status of the plants are and the people there. Along with that, we also have the visualizing kind of our end-to-end supply chain, understanding that once we do return to manufacturing, we got to make sure that that's supply chain and our suppliers are healthy, right, and can support that restart. So that there's a lot of visibility around that from a supplier tier 1, tier X perspective, all the way through to our dealer network. Then the other thing we're working on is how do we make sure that we're ready for return to work? How do we make sure that our members feel safe? So we've done significant disinfectant of our plants. There's a lot of discussion about social distancing from within the plant and processes. We're even working on IoT solutions that look at temperature scanning of team members when they come into the plants, to make sure that if we do have somebody that doesn't realize that they may have some of the signs, that we can pull them aside and get them some support from a farm or from a health perspective. So a lot of work. Definitely our IT systems are being taxed by you guys mentioned it earlier about Office 365. We had to significantly upgrade our platforms around that because of the significant work from home. Working with Microsoft, for example, our remote access VPN, we had to do some work there, but luckily most of those systems were fairly stable, so it just required some upgrades. So quite a bit of work from an IT side. Our team's been working maybe more hours from home than we were from the office, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, that is, I think a lot of people are. I think we have one more minute. If you don't mind, I'll throw a quick follow-up to you. If you need to drop, let me know. But one of our audience members is an editor, actually, and has been working from home for many years through the company's VPN, but recognizes that there might not be a whole lot of jobs in manufacturing that really lend themselves best to working at home. And in an automotive manufacturing plant or a supplier's plant, that very well may be the case. So what are some of the jobs that do lend themselves best to working from home, especially with some of these new monitoring technologies? And what about the impact of robotics and other more autonomous manufacturing processes? Can you comment on that in the half a minute?
It's a really, really good question, and a lot of work that's happening around that. As you can imagine, we, from a Toyota perspective, there's a lot of most of our jobs, do require team members at the plant. So, there's not a lot of work from home options when you start talking about, the actual production team members on the line. But we, right now with our shutdown, we of course are trying to provide, some distance learning and training for team members during this time. There's actually a whole work stream that's working on that for a number of our workforce. But in parallel, from an IT perspective and some of the robotics, there's continuing effort, especially as we restart back up, and continued focus from a budgetary perspective to move to some of the autonomous technologies, especially autonomous delivery, AGV, VGV, fleet management solutions, that type of thing. So we're still working on a lot of that, a lot of cobots in the plant that are still a focus as we kind of transform our factories.
Sure. Well, again, we're going to keep going with this discussion, but I understand that you've got an urgent need for you to be present elsewhere. So thanks for joining us, and we'll circle back again and talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Sure. I'd like to expand on what Trevor had mentioned and also bring it back to something, Brad, that you brought up earlier. You had mentioned automatic check-in of trucks, and I think you're talking about trucks delivering raw materials, if I'm not mistaken. And as that's another type of process that can be automated and reduce the reliance on plant workers being on site. Can you talk about that a little bit, Brad? Because I'm not really sure that a lot of people understand what that means and what that implies.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question, Chris. So to expand on that just a little bit, when we think about smart manufacturing, we often immediately focus on the equipment that's within the four walls of the plant. And how do we optimize that equipment? How do we service that equipment? How do we get analytics out of that equipment? But on the supply chain side, in North America and also in Europe, most of the goods that are moved in and out of the plants are coming in by truck, can be rail car as well, some barge, some ship, some pipeline. And there's a lot of people interaction that's involved in that, as it's actually the front end to a lot of unloading and load out type operations. So the feedback that I'm getting from industry perspectives is when they look at smart manufacturing a bit broader than just within the four walls of the plant, you look at all of the activities very quickly, you can focus on, there are some activities that are absolutely critical that you need a human there watching. It can be a reaction process, it can be an assembly type process. But then there are a lot of ancillary activities where you have humans involved today that are doing administration type activities, like to check in a truck to make sure that it is safe to come in to either unload raw materials or to load out finished products. There's usually a guardhouse there with a human interaction. But technology is evolved to the point where we should ask questions. Why can't the truck driver check themselves in with a simple iPhone or iPad application or a kiosk? So there is no human interaction at that point. And then how far into your plant can you continue that thought process? So they can check in. Can they go to a weight scale by themselves? Can they back up to a loading dock? Can you have an automatic robot move the material to a staging area? And I think through that lens, what I'm starting to hear from manufacturers in the US here is that there's a lot of opportunity to use existing technologies to take away some of those, I'll just call them more administrative tasks, and make them reliant on the people who are there to do the work already. And that also helps with social distancing. And if you think about how many truck drivers and trucks that we have on the road in the United States or in Europe in a day, you can see that interaction and activity is up to the hundreds of thousands that we could immediately fold into this type of environment. And plus that will immediately connect you through a digitized supply chain. So people in supply chain will know when a truck's checked in, when it's been loaded, unloaded, and when it's available for the next load.
Yeah, so by automating that, the additional upside is more granular information more quickly, right?
Yeah, and like today, my son goes to the barbershop and he has a self check-in at Sports Clip. So that technology is already there. It's a question of how do we industrialize it in a broader context. Yep.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'd actually like to kind of combine that topic along with one of the questions that's come in from the audience as well. And this is going to go to you, Jimmy. So get your microphone ready. The audience member has said that many companies are still struggling with how to define return on investment and declare that return on investment and use it to justify implementation of new enabling technologies. And let's face it, to do some of the things that Brad has talked about and others have talked about, Trevor and others, it is going to take some investment in some areas. So as we move towards that, can you talk about how you, as a consultant, are seeing different companies define that value, and also how they're doing it differently, if they are doing it differently in the context of the COVID-19 crisis? Jimmy?
Yeah, great question. Relative to the investment, usually most companies are locking that into some greater return on either cost savings or the revenue upside. As we talk about a lot with inside of smart manufacturing, it's the enablement of new business models that may not have been present before, because you're unlocking data not only from manufacturing, but the broader supply chain. So that enablement brings new revenue models, and based upon those revenue models, companies are deploying underneath of that forecasted revenue. Relative to the COVID, the investment opportunities are seen as ways of shoring their market position in the future when manufacturing does return largely.
Okay. Yeah, and actually, from the audience, actually, there's some other questions about, when it's time to start to ramp back up, and a few people have asked questions about that. And I guess I'll ask you, Conrad, to talk about that a little bit as it pertains to, taking some operations that have been shut down due to necessity or due to lack of demand. Can you talk a little bit about what you and SESME have discussed around, bringing things back online when it's time to do it, and when it's done, how the new ways of working are actually going to impact the workforce?
Yeah, the reality, you guys have been watching on TV how the numbers are playing out. And so the response to these unplanned big events, right, can be divided into like 3 stages. And, that's that short-term response that happens in days and weeks, and we take care of safety issues, quarantine, communication policies. Then you have intermediate term is weeks and months where we are adjusting to this short-term reality and adjusting how we're going to start adjusting to the new norm, operations, supply chain, evaluate which suppliers are still there, which ones can handle what, which ones we need to replace, what's available. And then longer term, months and maybe even years, where is a recovery period. How do we get back to growth? How do we accelerate that? How do we put in place a supply chain that is more visible, agile, reliable, and it has more resiliency? It's the reality. So if you look at those 3 sections, I would say that intermediate term, weeks, months, the longer term, months, and probably years, that there's going to be an impact of this event.
Sure. So, as we've talked about, it's kind of a balance of some companies having to literally shut things down or slow things down, and then other companies having to ramp up and even become more efficient, more creative, given that they might be part of critical infrastructure. And again, going back to some of the audience questions here, there are some processes that quite simply, even though they might be absolutely necessary, they can't be done purely in an automated fashion. And I wonder if there's anybody, I'll leave this up for anybody in the panelists, any of the panelists right now. Can you think of some processes that just can't be done without people? And then I'll ask you to comment on, a little bit on to what extent smart manufacturing can help those people that have to be there to work in a safe and still efficient manner. Is there anybody who would like to jump in on that one?
Well, I can do this over here.
Thanks.
So, as we said earlier, I think if we have manual activities, what we see in the automotive industry, for example, with some of the assembly activities on the discrete environment, which is difficult to automate sometimes. But we see the need of higher educated people, and therefore what I was mentioning before is really the case. How do we secure that we've been able of educating the people and building up a business development plan for them, or a general personal development plan for them, on getting them to a higher knowledge base, and that in combination with technology, again, can be quite nicely supported. So based on the skill set of the people, based on their knowledge, based on their experience, either bring them together in the right teams, bring them or provide them the right information as work instruction, as supportive information. That could be done with augmented reality, that could be done with smart technology in general, allowing them to be more flexible, and by that as well building up their knowledge and giving them as well the capability of feeding back things, because that is something I very often see. I mean, we still see a lot of continuous improvement activity or suggestions systems which are still being driven manually as well. From my perspective, they should become the integrated part of all the process, because the digital operator, or the operator 4.0, if you want to call them that way, as a smart manufacturing, becomes more and more a key element in the overall process, and therefore we need to enable them with the right technologies and tools. How many I mean, I'm always comparing that a little bit as well, how we work in our private life versus we work in the manufacturing environment. I mean, everyone is using its cell phone and its tablets, and when we go in manufacturing, that is more or less not there. And we're using, I mean, when something needs to be repaired, no one is looking anymore on the manual. Everyone is looking on YouTube and seeing what can be done. And these kind of things can be done with smart manufacturing very well, and supporting people in this journey. But we need to take that step and utilizing the technology from a hardware as well as from a software perspective, and really enable our operators and our people in the plant, which need to be there, to enable them in the smart manufacturing environment.
Okay, so basically you believe that better education can help them be safer at the jobs that do require manual intervention.
Absolutely, yes, and also making them more flexible, because if we do, as Trevor was saying before, if I take the truck driver as an example, he's acting as a truck driver today, but when he comes on the site, he might do some other things. We see operator doing some maintenance activities. We see other people jumping from one responsibility to the other. So it becomes more and more agile what people need with each other. And therefore, information providing, exchanging information and sharing things in teams in an agile way becomes more important and provides more safety as well.
Sure. Yep. Good points. Scott, I believe you raised your virtual hand as Uwe was responding. Would you like to jump in and add to that answer, or perhaps take it in a slightly different direction based on your experience?
Yeah, sure. In any crisis or any major problem that you run into, you sort of go through a problem solving set of ideas, and you contain the problem and then try to fix whatever the root cause is. And I think this crisis has certainly forced all of us to look at evaluate everything we do from a standpoint of how we operate. We've hit into, and Conrad hit on this a little bit with short-term kind of next steps and then long-term. But I think this crisis will cause us to look at all the way we operate around safety of our employees. We're doing that now, but there'll be another flu season come the end of this year, and I think a lot of companies, and we will be evaluating just how we continue to keep our operators and all of our employees safe. Maybe not exactly to this degree, but certainly using this as a baseline. And I think all of us have hit on the communication part of how we communicate with our teams and with our workforce, and how we track a little better. So there's opportunities there for improvement that we certainly look at, and then all of the processes, and I think Brad hit on some of that too, and automating truck entry. And so while major issues and crises can cause you certainly short-term pain. They're also opportunities to try to improve and prevent issues, contingency planning, which a lot of companies do. But I think it's a good opportunity for all of us to sort of baseline where we are and set very strong, improvement plans that we can implement all across our supply chain, but certainly in our own plants and with our people is and maybe that's a little along the lines that we were just talking about on the training. So.
Sure. No, that's a good addition. Shifting gears a little bit here, there definitely have been a lot of questions and comments that have come in from the audience as we've been talking that are somewhat related. And Jimmy, I'm going to put you on the spot again for this. So listen up here, and first listen to this comment from the audience, and then I'll pose a couple of related questions to you. So the comment from an audience member was, we need to look at our entire ecosystem, protect our suppliers, our customers, and our employees. Vendors and customers need to fight this together, and ROI can be determined later. Right now, we need fast action to ensure people's safety and to ensure that we're actually able to come back from this at all. So again, not a question there, but a comment, and a rather strong one as well. So, the comment is essentially, heck with coming up with the ROI first and then figuring out, how to do it later. Let's just go get it done. And some related questions that are kind of around that. Again, are you and others of your clients and the other panelists in your experience seeing a trend where capital expenditure is locked up? So it's really not possible for plants to fund projects in a traditional way. And are they finding other ways to fund projects? Are they just doing it anyways for the sake of the safety of the workers and the consumers and suppliers as well? And then I guess to add on to that, another question came up around, what can we do to free up funds in order to get some of this stuff done and not be so short-sighted when it comes to looking at the ROI. Have you seen any trends around that, Jimmy, where people are looking for alternative ways to justify and in some ways just not even doing the justification and just going for it?
Yeah, as you can imagine, first of all, I appreciate the spirit of the comment, and I think that many of us share that from an aspirational perspective. If you think about many of the manufacturers and clients that I interact with and our company interacts with, is they span the gamut. Some of them have cash reserves that they're invoking and putting countermeasures into place to make investments without sort of some of the hurdles that they've gone through before to shore up items like this, or to guarantee that when they do come back into manufacturing that they would be better mitigated. On the other side of the spectrum, others are facing very real issues from the standpoint of their capital assets are being depleted, either because of the lack of sales. Anytime that you're talking about taking down an entire manufacturing facility, obviously that does impact revenue. So we see quite the spectrum. And I think a lot of people, there's a lot of activity across. One thing is common, all of the people that I've interacted with are thinking about how can we put countermeasures in place and get things done and keep our employees safe, but do it in a fiscal, financial manner as well. So
Sure. Yeah, it is a balance, but obviously at times of extreme crisis, sometimes we need to upset that balance through other forces, and I think that's again the spirit of the comments and the questions there. Yeah. In a sort of a related way, Brad, I'm going to turn this on. Yeah,
one
go
thing
ahead,
I will
Jimmy,
say,
if you
Chris,
want to add something.
Just one thing I would add real quick to that is related to this. It is somewhat of a crisis across the entire world. And I have seen a lot of barriers between different companies that may be competitors have broken down here more recently. So there is more sharing of information between different customers that might think themselves competitors, to share IP, to share ideas around how to enable their workforce, how to keep people safe, how to support the broader supply chains. So I just wanted to add that comment as well too.
That's very interesting, actually, and encouraging to hear. I won't put you on the spot and ask you for examples there, because I'm sure some of that is confidential. But it is encouraging to hear that some of those barriers are being broken down, even across competitive companies. Conrad, I think you had raised your virtual hand and suggested that you'd like to add on to Jimmy's answer.
Well, yeah, to that point of the importance of ROI. I mean, just looking at cost reduction, I think it's not going to cut it anymore, right? I mean, you can only do so much by cutting. I think Jimmy made an important point that the revenue upside in new business models is what's going to be. The companies that can transform and adjust to the new reality of the market are going to get ahead, and that we're seeing the value of IT. If nothing else comes out of this, everybody will be more aware of how important IT and automation, remote visibility is. And I do agree with Uva's comment that that remote assistance, for example, is something that maybe is more important than ever. I mean, I'm using it. You know, we've had some doctor appointments through the internet, and you know, you can bring that expert doctor to your reality remotely. Why not bring the expert machine maintenance person, that expert integrator, also remotely? So I think we're going to be more creative and more aware of the value of some of these technology and information technology and how it can help these companies.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that's echoed by a lot of the comments that we're getting coming from the audience. So one more comment I'll add, and then I'll bring up a question to you, Brad. In response to some of these answers that Conrad and Jimmy have most recently given, one of the audience members commented just very recently, we need to ensure the health of the ecosystem. If my suppliers or my vendors or my customers don't survive, then we don't survive. So I think that's very well put and well understood. Yeah, there's a lot happening here where there's significant unemployment, as we know, a lot of jobs lost just in the last month, and probably more to come. And another comment from the audience: this needs to stop. And absolutely, I think we all agree. It's just about how to do it. Brad, I'm going to put you on the hot seat here, because I don't know that you're prepared to answer this, but maybe you can. There's a comment here, or a question from the audience about the need for our CIOs and IT teams to be key partners in transformation. And can you make any recommendations? And I'm not picking you out for any specific reason, other than I'd like to kind of round out the questions and answers here to the whole group. Do you have any recommendations about how operations teams and continuous improvement teams and others that are trying to do the right thing here, how they can work with the IT groups and the C-level officers to try to keep the C-suite and the IT teams from acting in a guardian role, and really open up the ability to try to do some of these projects that are going to make things better, safer, and make the companies more viable? Any thoughts there?
Oh, that's a real good question. Unfortunately, there isn't a magic wand to wave over that can get us an answer immediately. But a little bit philosophically here, I have some optimism in that space. And I think that optimism stems, the feedback that I'm getting from a lot of folks is the reality is starting to set in that you can't go at this crisis alone by yourself. And I think people are seeing that not only on a personal level, but they're also seeing that on a business level. right? So if we look at a business level, if we look at the C-suite or some of the big organizations that had more of a guardian type role, I think you will see that they will continue to have that perspective, but it can be built into a vision of how do we move forward in this space. So I'll give you an example of a vision that comes to my mind. We talk about smart manufacturing and what it means for us as people in operations. Smart manufacturing we can define as a smart plant. What does a smart plant mean for us? And how do we get data out of the plant? How do we get support into the plant in a smart way? But a plant is part of a supply chain. So what does a smart supply chain look like, right? That's where you have the customers and the suppliers integrated in, and you want to build very, very close partnerships with them where you can exchange digital information to help everybody stay equal as they go through a time of crisis like this. But then even at a broader level, what does a smart company look like? What does a smart enterprise look like? And there's where you have opportunities where you can bring in supporting type organizations that can help if you're digitally enabling them to do that. And those organizations can be anything from an engineering firm that can come in and help you out. It can be anything from an external IT service provider that can help you out. It can even be an audit firm that can help you out. So for me, the starting point is to recognize that something that's becoming very, very apparent to all of us is that good partnerships prove their worth in times of crisis. And I'm not sure that this is going to be viewed as a one-time crisis. I think this is going to be an all-time crisis that we have to learn to deal with. And from that standpoint, I think we can start laying down the frameworks, the North Star and the vision of how do we all work together through a strong partnership to achieve those objectives that we have in our company at the highest level. Now, very pragmatically, what I think works well is with these organizations that are controlling an ecosystem of which plant solutions need to fit into, is get them involved early in your conversations. Get them involved earlier in where you see technology can help unlock and enable productivity or value-added activities. I think in the past, and I'm also a little bit guilty of this, we bring the IT folks in later, and then we can't understand why our solution doesn't fit within the ecosystem that they've created and they're trying to leverage. So bring them into the discussion earlier and appreciate that they do have to make sure that the ecosystem stays safe and coherent, just like we try to do in our plans. And by getting them in earlier, you can have the discussion around, okay, we need to get to the North Star there, and directionally, how can we all get there together? Because we do need each other's partnerships to be successful.
Yeah. Brad, I think that's very well said, Brad.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And one thing that I would add is, don't mistake my expression here, but in times of crisis, it helps break down some of the petty barriers that we run into, not only from company to company, but from within inside of the organization as well. And it does bring people together and think about synergistic ways of working. To your point, we very quickly realize each other's true value in times of crisis and how we can leverage each other's strengths.
Yeah, that's very true, and just out of necessity in some cases, and that's very true today. So listen, we're approaching the end of the hour. In fact, we've hit the end of the hour, so we don't really have any time for additional questions, which is unfortunate. We've received a number of really awesome questions from the audience. We're going to try to have some of our panelists get back to you for the answers that I couldn't ask online here. In writing, so we'll see what we can do in that regard. I would like to leave you with two things. First of all, one more comment from our audience, which is a little bit of a glimmer of hope. And obviously every country and every region of the world is kind of dealing with this at a different rate based on when they've been exposed to the virus and how quickly it's ramped up and in some cases ramped down. Obviously China saw it as one of the first countries to really be hit hard by it. One of our audience members has indicated that their site in China, their production site in China, was down for several weeks. However, now they're back up to 90 or 95% production So there is hope, even though it's not easy to withstand that kind of a difficult crisis. There is hope for bringing things back. So I hope everybody can see that glimmer of hope in their own organizations, in their own industries, and as stated by Jimmy and Brad and others earlier, definitely working together is the only way we're going to be able to do that. To that end, I do want to remind everybody that Mesa, the Manufacturing Enterprise Solutions Association, is a good place to have these discussions and to try to overcome some of these issues as a team, a virtual team working across different companies. That is one of the key benefits of membership at Mesa, is the ability to network with others. So if you're not a member, please take a look at mesa.org. We're about to undergo some significant development work on our next Mesa model, which is focused on smart manufacturing, which we all hope is going to be a cornerstone for the industry going forward. And you better believe that the COVID-19 crisis is going to have a significant impact on our development there. So thank you all for joining. If you have any further questions for us, for the panelists or anybody at Mesa, go to mesa.org, click the contact link. Feel free to reach out to myself or any of us via LinkedIn. I see actually on my phone that several of you have already done that over the course of the discussion. I want to thank you again for joining, and I hope to see you again at a future Mesa webcast. Take care, everybody, and be safe.